Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me once again is Matt Taglia, Senior Director of Emerson College Polling. Matt, thanks so much for coming on.
Happy to be here, Brittany.
This week marked President Trump's first full year back in office, and Emerson College Polling has a new poll out showing how voters feel about him, recent events, other government leaders, the midterms, and even more. So I first want to start, though, with President Trump. Since he's been sworn in a second time now for a full year, how are voters feeling about him?
And Brittany, it's not great. So when we look at Trump's approval rating, even since December, we see that he's got 43% approve, 51% disapprove. That's about the same as in December. But the difference here is that there's more polarization. So we see that Republicans are more so approving of Trump than they were in December, whereas Democrats and independents, they are more disapproving of Trump than they were in December. So even in just this month span, we've seen more polarization among the electorate. Now, I will note that this is likely voters. We've now switched to likely voters for the 2026 midterm election. So it's a little bit different universe here. But nevertheless, this is what we're seeing. And it does give us a little bit of a preview of what to look forward to in November.
Trump's been in office, like we said, for a full year now, and it's fully baked in, I feel, people's sentiment towards him. So how does this stack up to where his approval was last year?
Yeah, and so last year we saw that Trump had an overall favorable approval. He was in the positive. Now that's not the case. He's in the negatives. If we look at the right direction, wrong track question, I think this is pretty interesting too. 44% say that the country is headed in the right direction versus 56% who say that it's on the wrong track. That is a 16-point net shift since January of last year. There is very clearly a move towards folks feeling like the country is headed on this wrong track. They are more disapproving of Trump, far more disapproving of Trump than they were in January of last year. Again, I think that this gives us a preview of what we'll see throughout the rest of this poll and in midterms.
And I feel like if I was a Republican right now running in the midterms, that would make me nervous, right? That would give me pause that this shift where more people now think that we're on the wrong track as a country, especially because there's a Republican in the White House and Republicans control both Congress and the Senate. So what does this all mean for midterms? And as a Republican, am I hitching my wagon to Trump, or am I pivoting away? Am I separating from the president?
So we'll start with just the overall generic ballot here, because this is the worst performance for Republicans that we've seen in our polling yet for the midterm elections. So on the generic ballot, 48% support Democrats, 42% support Republicans. So that's a 6-point difference there. Again, highest lead for Democrats we've seen yet. Independents now break for Democrats by about a 20-point margin, nearly 60%. If that holds, I would be terrified as a Republican running in 2026 this November. That is really tough. In some of these swing districts, it could get brutal for them. Women break for Democrats by 15 points. Again, I think that's speaking to some of the problems here, some of the polarization. These are major alarm bells for the GOP. Now, as I mentioned before, Trump is actually up in his approval among Republicans. So I do think that at least in some of these primary elections, some of these Republicans are really going to want to ride Trump's coattails because overall he performs well within the party. But once we get to those general elections in November, all bets are off. They need to distance themselves from Trump because they're going to lose independents. They're going to obviously lose the vast majority of Democrats. But in some of these swing districts, those independents are going to really play a key factor, and they need to distance themselves here.
And something we've talked about now time and time again in 2024, 2025, now 2026 is the economy. It's a top issue for voters of both parties. And since more people now are thinking that the country is shifting to the wrong track, I'm assuming that's a bleak outlook for the economy. What specifically does that look like?
Yeah, so when we look at the issues, again, we see that the economy is a top issue, 32%. Now we also see, though, that threats to democracy is very close to that, 24%. That's up 10 points since December. When we look at the economy specifically, and we ask about Trump's policies, 55% say that the Trump administration is making the economy worse. That I would not want to see if I'm Trump or if I'm a Republican on the ballot in November. Uh, Only 38% say that the Trump administration's policies are making the economy better. Again, not what I'd want to see. I think that some of these Republicans out there are really going to have to tailor their messaging more towards that sort of affordability angle and pivot away from things like tariffs, et cetera.
You also asked about some government officials who have been involved in some of the biggest stories so far in 2026 and before. I'm thinking of Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Vice President J.D. Vance, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, amongst others. What did you find here?
Yeah, so we find that most of these cast of characters within the cabinet, they test all right. So Marco Rubio, will start there. He has the highest net approval of the cabinet members, 43% approve, 41% disapprove. If we go down to Kristi Noem, who has been in the news more so lately as the head of the Department for Homeland Security, 38% favorable versus 45% unfavorable. So that is the worst among the Trump administration here, a net 6 points unfavorable. Some of the others, like RFK, he performs about the same as Rubio, 43% favorable, 41% unfavorable. So I don't think that the Trump administration's policies are necessarily affecting some of these folks who are in office, at least in terms of their favorability. We haven't seen too many changes between these. I think that we do see that these folks are paying more attention. There are fewer sort of don't knows. But by far and away, the one person who really stands out here is Jerome Powell. We find that he has 45% favorable versus 27% unfavorable. So that is a really, really high number there. We know that Trump has been attacking Powell within the past few weeks. That might be folly because he is well liked by the electorate.
That really surprised me because President Trump has made it no secret that he doesn't like Fed Chairman Powell. He's called him a jerk. He's called him stupid. He wishes that he slashed interest rates more aggressively. Most recently, Chairman Powell revealed that he's under a DOJ investigation over his testimony regarding cost overruns for renovations of different Fed buildings. Powell said that the investigation was more so about if the Fed could remain independent or not. What does this indicate to you that he has the highest net favorability and President Trump out of this list, I mean, has been most vocally critical of him?
Yeah, I think that it speaks to the polarization that we're seeing in this poll. This is Democrats and independents overwhelmingly against Trump, Democrats in particular, but also independents coming around and saying, hey, we don't like this. We don't like what we're seeing. If we look at finances, what folks say about their finances versus a year ago, 39% say that it's worse than a year ago. And I don't think that they necessarily blame Jerome Powell for their finances being worse. Again, I think we see some of that blame really placed on the Trump administration on things like tariffs, et cetera. So there's a few different things going on here, but really there's just that polarization and then this feeling that the economy is not being helped by the Trump administration, and Powell is seen in odds with the Trump administration.
The poll also took the temperature on some of the biggest domestic and international stories so far in 2026. I do want to first set our sights abroad. Let's look at South America, because in a stunning middle-of-the-night operation the beginning of January, U.S. forces captured Venezuela's sitting leader, Nicolas Maduro. They then brought him to New York City, where he faces drug, narco-terrorism, and weapons charges. After the attack, President Trump did say that the United States is going to run Venezuela, and we will be heavily involved in the country's oil industry. How are voters feeling about this?
And I think this is where the Trump administration actually sees some of their best numbers. So 46% disapprove of the administration's actions in Venezuela, 39% approve. So that's just 7 points there of net disapproval. Again, it's going to get worse as we go through some of these other policies and actions of the administration. But I think that this is a bit of a highlight. I think that there are folks out there who do like the actions in Venezuela. And if we look at Hispanics specifically, because this certainly affects the Hispanic community, a lot of them are interested in this. We see that they approve overall, 44% versus 37% disapprove. I think that that's kind of an important number to keep in mind. Hispanics played a major role in the 2024 election with some, as we've seen, swings towards Trump. So that may hold. That may hold during the midterms. We're not seeing evidence of that yet. But things like this are things that might resonate with that community and that could help electorally.
When describing his foreign policy after the capture of Maduro, President Trump did say, "We've now superseded the Monroe Doctrine. It's now the Donroe Doctrine." And he used this Donroe Doctrine policy to justify his push to acquire Greenland. He says that the United States needs it for national security purposes. But this idea is not popular amongst the people of Greenland. Certainly, if we saw on the stage at Davos this week, it's not popular amongst European leaders. But do Americans like this idea? Do Americans want the United States to acquire Greenland? What does that look like?
And Brittany, we actually tested this last year around the same time, and we found that overall Americans did not want to add Greenland as a territory to the U.S. And now it's only gotten worse. 50%, a bare majority, are opposed to Greenland becoming a part of the U.S. or becoming a territory in any sort of way. 28% support. So that's very low support, just about a quarter of the electorate. That opposition has increased by a net of 8 points since last year, 1 year ago. So this is not a popular proposal. I know that this has shifted to some degree, and that it isn't necessarily a proposal to take all of Greenland. We've seen a few different bits of reporting that there might be military bases. We'll test that in the future, depending on whatever that policy ends up being. But right now, we see that the vast majority are not supportive of adding Greenland as any sort of territory to the U.S.
I do now want to turn back home and set our sights on Minnesota, because earlier this month, an ICE agent fatally shot a woman named Renee Good in Minneapolis. And since then, anti-ICE protests have popped up throughout the country. Videos of ICE agents acting aggressively have gone viral. And even podcaster Joe Rogan have questioned the agency's tactics. He's compared them to the Gestapo. How are people feeling about ICE in general right now?
And I think that this is the low point of the administration's policies and actions in this poll. 57% say that the presence of ICE has been more harmful in communities than beneficial. 38% say that it has been more beneficial. So that is a clear majority who say that ICE is not helping, that it is actively harming communities. If we look at some of the demographics here, 55% of Hispanics say that it's more harmful, not far from 51% of white voters who say it's more harmful. Obviously, overwhelming majority of Democrats say that it's more harmful. But even when we look at Republicans, 18% say that ICE is more harmful in these communities than beneficial. I think that's an interesting number. There's only about 75%. That is a sizable number. I don't want to understate that, but there is this group within Republicans who are a little bit queasy with some of the actions of ICE, with some of the actions of the Trump administration, and that's understandable just given the press coverage this has received. But this is by far the worst policy or policy action we've seen in this poll for the Trump administration.
And when I'm looking at this poll, if I'm a Republican, I'm thinking, there aren't too many bright spots for me, especially in a midterms year, perhaps Venezuela, but other than that, not so much, especially when you're looking at President Trump's approval rating. But if I'm a Democrat, what am I thinking? What are my biggest concerns based on this poll? And what are my biggest bright spots? Read the tea leaves for us.
Yeah, well, if I'm a Democrat, I'm probably pretty happy with the results, because come November, a lot of these Democrats, especially in some of these statewide contests, can very easily just run against the Trump administration and tie Republicans to the Trump administration at the state level as much as they possibly can. And I think that's probably enough to run up the score here, all things being equal, everything standing as it is right now. So there are very few pitfalls, I think. I do think that we see some approval of, as you said, Venezuela, some of these international actions, and also on some immigration. We've seen evidence that folks do prefer the Trump administration's approach to immigration policy overall, maybe not necessarily enforcement. But that is one area where Democrats have struggled with immigration and immigration policy. So I think, if anything, that is going to be a major difficulty for them. Maybe it's something to contend with, though, to actually put something up for as a proposal that isn't just not Trump, right? Just not the Trump administration's policies. So they need to think that through. But otherwise, running against the Trump administration is likely to be successful for them.
We are in a midterms year, so that means we certainly have a lot to look out for. I'm sure you will have plenty of polls out, and I hope we can have a lot of conversations about them. Matt Taglia, per usual, I appreciate the conversation. Thanks for joining me.
See you next time. Thanks, Brittany.